Good afternoon, and welcome to the Pastor's Cut. This is something we do during St. Luke's on Broadway, in which it's a real informal kind of a time, and I'm not worried about being quite so polished as on a Sunday morning. Just want to share with you some fun things that when I did my research for that week's musical, you start discovering, and yet they may not be theological things, but I find them interesting things. But they don't make it into the sermon because it doesn't help us understand Scripture or push the message along. And sometimes there's really great things I want to include, but don't really have the time. So this is just kind of a casual time to share you some of the wonderful things that I was learning about that Sunday's musical and share them that they didn't make the cut. So anyway, today we're looking at Footloose. It first of all came out as a movie in 1984, and then it opened on Broadway in 1998. And so it was about a 14-year difference between when the movie came out and then when it opened on Broadway. It was Dean Pitchford who actually first came up with the idea and wrote the screenplay that was the movie, but then he's also the one who wrote the book for the Broadway musical. Very unusual. And he helped to co-write every one of the songs on the soundtrack. In all my Broadway musicals I've been working on, I don't think I've come across that so far. So it really is amazing what Dean Pitchford did. But some of the other interesting things that I thought were just kind of fun to share. In the movie, the character Wren that we've been looking at, Wren McCormick, was played by Kevin Bacon. But what it was supposed to be played originally by Tom Cruise, and then when he couldn't do it, it was going to be Rob Lowe, and then he blew out his knee in an audition, and then it was Kevin Bacon who got the part that certainly changed his life. Ariel was played by Laurie Singer, but the other person, there was many people who wanted that part. I mean, people lined up for that part. And one of the people who auditioned for it was Madonna. It would have been her first major motion picture. Rusty, you remember, the girlfriend of Willard, who became friends with Wren. Well, when Dean wrote that part, he wrote that part specifically with Tammy Nelson in mind. Tammy Nelson was Ricky Nelson's daughter. And he had met her at a party. He just knew she would be wonderful for it. He wrote the part with her in mind, and she got the part. But then when they got to Provo, Utah, and began trying to do some filming, they just noticed that Tammy did not look like everybody else who'd been cast in their roles. She did not look like she was going to fit in that little town, and so they took her out of the role. And that's when they turned to Sarah Jessica Parker. It was her first major motion picture. Sarah Jessica Parker, you remember, had been on Broadway in Annie. She had been Annie in the Broadway musical. And now she had been doing a little acting. She got just a little older. And when she went to Provo, Utah to record this film, it was the first time in her life she'd been out living on her own. And it was a real time of growing up, she said, for her, to learn how to budget her time, her money, her energy, to be prepared. Filming Footloose was one of those watershed moments of growing up in her life. John Lithgow, who played the Reverend Shaw Moore. What a great actor. The reason I wanted to lift him up was that was fascinating. This week, as we look at Shrek, he is the voice of Lord Farquaad. So that's going to be fun as we look at that. John was in last week's Footloose, and now he'll be in this week's musical as well. But the thing about John was he is actually descended from Governor Bradford, who came over on the Mayflower, who was one of the Pilgrims. He is in direct descendants of Governor Bradford. And it was also interesting when his parents were moving around, I believe it was while they were in Ohio for a while, he had an interesting babysitter. His babysitter was Coretta Scott, who later married Martin Luther King. Coretta Scott King was his babysitter when he was a small boy. Pretty cool. As I've been telling you, they actually Though the story was about a town here in Oklahoma, they filmed this in Provo, Utah. And one of the little towns near Provo was Payson. And Payson was one of the places they turned to get extras when they were making this movie. Now, when they're making the movie, if you remember Footloose, I mean, they're always taking off their shirts and people are in different stages of dress. Nothing inappropriate, but still a little more risque, especially for the 1980s. And then there was a shower scene. Again, nothing is shown, but you can use your imagination, and that's what the people did. And so in Payson, they begin to think they're filming an X-rated movie out here, and they're paying people to take their clothes off. I mean, these were all the kind of rumors that began to run. And so they became so angry, and they've been signing a petition to force them to stop filming and to leave. Well, Footloose actually got a PG rating. There was nothing that was inappropriate about it. But you can see how people's different views on things could be. In the end, Payson decided to no longer sponsor any kind of school dances after they filmed Footloose right there. So here's a movie all about control and censorship, and it's actually what begins to happen in a little town in Utah. The person who was the director of that initial film was Herbert Ross. And I didn't get to talk about him on Sunday, and he's a fascinating story. He was born in 1927 up in Brooklyn. His parents had been Russian Jewish immigrants. And as you can imagine, they struggled there. His mother died when he was 9 years old. His father moved the family down to Miami, and there he opened a little luncheonette. When he was just in high school, about 15 years old, Herbert decided school wasn't for him. He wanted to go to New York and be an actor. And so he left home, went to New York. He had no training, no real money or backing. And yet in no time at all, he actually got on dancing as a dancer and performing some small parts there in some Broadway musicals. And from there, he discovered, I'm really not a great dancer, but I really know how to choreograph. And so he began choreographing different dance scenes, but he really worked with ballet, the American Ballet Company. And in the 1950s and 60s, here he is such a young man in his 20s and ultimately in his 30s, he had a huge impact in dancing and American ballet and then on Broadway shows. And that's what he really was known for, was a choreographer in those kind of times. But then he started thinking, I could be a director. And so sure enough, after the 50s and 60s with the dancing and acting in the 1970s and 80s, he really turned to directing movies, went out to Hollywood. And in the end, he would direct movies like, his first one was Goodbye, Mr. Chips, The Owl and the Pussycat with Barbra Streisand, who was just coming onto the scenes, and Herbert Ross saw a talent, and he would turn her into a star. There would be the ones that would follow: Funny Lady, Goodbye Girl, California Suite, Footloose, Turning Point, Steel Magnolias. Those would be the films that Herbert would direct. They would all evolve as the time moved on in the 70s and through the 80s in so many different ways. And he was being interviewed, and he made the observation. He said, there's been some successes and some flops, but if you're not always willing to keep risking and trying something new, then you're dead. He would do that all his life. He would die in his early 70s, and through all of his life up to the time of his death, he was always trying and risking and doing new things so that he would keep growing. How important it is for us to keep risking and trying and doing new things so we can keep growing. I found Herbert Ross to be a real inspiration. And finally, Jennifer Laura Thompson. Jennifer Laura Thompson made her Broadway debut by playing the part of Ariel, Reverend Shaw Moore's daughter, obviously a lead part in the Broadway musical. And what I thought was fascinating is she played that part for all 700 plus performances. She didn't miss a one. She played them all for all those times. Now, almost 25 years later, she is on Broadway and she is playing the mother of Connor, the young man who committed suicide in Dear Evan Hansen. We looked at Dear Evan Hansen last week, or the week before, and then this past week we were looking at Footloose, and Jennifer Laura Thompson had her Broadway debut as Ariel in Footloose, and today she is playing the mother of Connor in Dear Evan Hansen. She wrote her mother a letter, and this was from Jennifer, and I thought it was of the right spirit. She said, "I'm writing this letter to you from a place that I would never be without a lifetime of support from you. Ever since I can remember, you have been there to cheer me on. My artwork was beautiful, my hair was gorgeous, my freckles, which I hated, were adorable. I was so smart, I was so talented, I could sing, I could dance. Go for it, Jenny, give them all you've got, knock their socks off," you would say. As far as you were concerned, I could do anything. Even though I didn't agree with all of those things, I eventually started to believe them in a way that instilled confidence without a hint of arrogance. I don't know how you did it. I would not be writing this letter for where I am without a lifetime of support from you. In high school, I was an excellent student, but I found my greatest joy performing with the drama club. I didn't see it coming, but I fell in love with the art of the musical. When I decided to attend the University of Michigan for a BA in musical theater, who does that? There you were again. Go for it, Jenny. Give them all you got. Knock their socks off. You never faltered, even with my risky dreams. I'm writing to you today from my Broadway dressing room at the home of the hit musical, Dear Evan Hansen. I'm playing a mom. My role is filled with you and with me and with us, with compassion and empathy, relentless and mostly hope. All the things I learned from you. This is not my first Broadway show. Your lesson in resiliency has made for a solid 25 years of performing on and off Broadway. Your spirit lives in me, and when I need you, I tell myself, go for it, Jenny. Go get 'em. I love you, Mom, and thanks. To live in a spirit of gratitude. It really reminded me of how I closed the sermon on Sunday, talking about Dean Pitchford, who wrote the screenplay for the film and wrote the book for the musical. And when he was asked how he thought about Footloose now, 30 years later, his first words were, "I am grateful for Herbert Ross. By the way he directed, the people he cast, he turned my story into this fable that has endured here in our culture." And he said, I look back with a real sense of gratitude and pride. Gratitude. To live in a spirit of gratitude. To your mother, to a director, to God. We have said this week that that's what we're going to focus on, really, is living in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving. That we were going to start each day with a time of prayer, and rather than praying, "Oh God, please help me," we said we're going to pray with a real prayer of, "Oh God, thank you," and begin to recount the many ways that God has blessed us. We remember, as the psalmist said, "You are the one who has turned my mourning into dancing, and has clothed me with joy." It is God's gift to us. That didn't make the cutting room floor. That made the sermon, because that's really what it's all about. I hope today is a wonderful day for you, a day full of gratitude and joy. Have a good one.